Whether that's making money by getting wrapped and saran wrapped by a plastic surgeon who's living a double life, or in Ru's case, becoming an arms dealer, either way, for the both of them, it's better than working in retail, or is becoming a sugar baby. It all began with her art school roommate by the name of Vivian, who introduced Jules to becoming a sugar baby. Vivian made it sound like easy money, but we know nothing in Euphoria is ever just easy because more times than not, they end up losing a part of who they actually are. Also, for my movie fans out there, I'm going to quiz you all in the comments right now. What very popular movie from the 90s had its main character's name as Vivian and maybe was the inspiration for Jules' story in this season? From here, we watch as Jules first met a 48-year-old lawyer by the name of Rick, whose therapist told him that he had severe intimacy issues, which is what led him into this particular situation. We see Rick pays Jules a good amount of money just for joining him for dinner, but he offers her more if she'll join him back at his place to indulge in his particular fetish. And that fetish, ladies and gentlemen, is Rick licking her nylons while he pleasures himself. As Jules quickly realizes that all it'll take is to see Rick a couple times a month and he'll pay her rent completely. But Jules isn't interested in just covering rent, she wants more. Jules would later extend her client's roster, and we're talking about a Hollywood producer, a finance bro, but then in comes Ellis, the plastic surgeon who would change her life. During their first date, if you want to call it that, they discuss the idea of people changing themselves over time, which leads him to bringing up and being so interested in talking about Jules' decision into transitioning when she was 40. As we learned last week, Ellis has a family of his own, and according to him, his wife is well aware of his behaviors, or as he calls them, weaknesses. Seeing them together, I couldn't help but to think, is Jules just reliving her trauma with Cal? Again, being involved with an older man who's also living a double life, but this time around, she's now older and she's the one holding the cards, or at least that's what she thinks. As time went by, we see Jules would eventually leave her art school behind, as she would go on to make more money than she can ever imagine, as Ellis became her sole source of income and would be her only client. Now, I couldn't help but to notice her roommate Vivian listening into her conversation with her dad about leaving school. It almost felt like she wanted this all to happen for Jules to go into this lifestyle of being this sugar baby, or maybe there is something more insidious or more sinister about Vivian having her go to this lifestyle. I am really curious to know why they chose to show us her hearing this conversation going on. Now we watch as Ellis and Jules indulge in one of Ellis's behavioral activities as he wraps her from head to toe in saran wrap with only her mouth open for her to breathe, as he's made her into his perfect piece of art. Now in this breakdown, we'll be talking a lot about foreshadowing, a lot of symbolism in this episode, and this being one of them. Could seeing Jules wrapped like this be symbolic of her literally being wrapped up in this almost Pretty Woman fairy tale type of lifestyle? Now, similar to last week, I got a lot of thoughts and questions about this opening scene, which I actually thought was really interesting. First off, how important will Ellis be to Jules this season, and how long until Ellis's wife gets involved? We know that she is quote-unquote aware of his weaknesses, but that feels like more of a one-sided story, so I do wonder if his wife really does approve of his lifestyle. Second is logistical questions, like how does a sugar baby actually build a roster like this? Is it referral based? Is it an app that they use? Or does she have a boss that sets up her meetings? And finally, do you all think that Jules is actually happy? I mean, she looks like she's in control, right? But then you think about it, wrapping yourself in plastic for a man who treats you like a mannequin is a far cry from the girl that we last saw in season 2. We all know that Jules wants to escape her past, but is she just building a more unstable future? Now, as far as the scene itself, as far as the production of it all, I thought it was shot really well, but I also will say for the first time this season, I thought Hans Zimmer's score really fit into the scene. It kind of felt like this royal princess meeting her sugar daddy, Prince Charming. Now, as far as Jules is concerned, she has always been one of my favorite characters in the show. Despite her character feeling a bit lost at the end of season 2 for me, with everything going on with the love triangle between her, Ru, and Elliot, I've always found her story to be one of the most compelling, as she spends so much time looking for validation in people who can't give it to her. Going back to when we first met Jules in season 1 and getting her backstory and seeing how she dealt with depression and anxiety, which eventually led her mother to taking her to the hospital against her will at the age of 11, I've always had this feeling of like comforting her and wanting her to find happiness, even if that meant removing herself from someone like Ru. As we all know, her choices romantically haven't always been the best for her. It's been like this toxic cycle between, again, Ru and Cal and Nate and Anna and Elliot, all examples of relationships that come from a place of self-doubt and self-discovery, which has led her to the person that we see in this opening scene. Now again, I wonder, is this newfound independence actually growth for Jules? Or is this just the latest iteration of her self-destructive tendencies? So I really did love this opening scene, similar to last week's with Maddie, which it tells a story about what's going on with these characters, but also sets the tone and the theme for the episode. Thinking about this pattern so far, Cassie with her OnlyFans, Ru had her dealings with Alamo, Maddie has her own side hustles. So far this season seems to be obsessed with the idea of how these young people are selling pieces of themselves to survive or to just simply be seen. It seems to be the central theme of the season so far, again, trading your autonomy for a sense of power. Now, back at the Silver Slipper, we see that Rosalia, who I got named wrong last week, but we see that her neck brace isn't a boner killer as she performs on stage for a client. But while the stage is hot, the real action is in the back for a transaction. It's here we see Ru's promotion after dropping off Angel at the suspicious rehab center, as she is now an arms dealer for Alamo, moving weapons headed down to Mexico.
You lost your mind because I'll help you find it.
Ru has become the employee of the month for Alamo, as she's making 3% commission off the sales of the weapons, but the vibe gets a little weird when she tells Alamo that she's just doing this work so she can work her way up to doing something legit. I found this conversation to be so fascinating because Alamo shuts her down by blurring the lines between what's legal and illegal. In his world, it's all just power and money. If you're making bank, what's to complain about? It's important to see how this conversation is structured to make Ru think that what she's doing is legit.
Do you have a moral problem with what you're doing?
What? No, I'm cool. I'm like, cool.
I look at someone like Ru or Jules or Nate or Cassie and how these characters don't have a problem morally about their actions. Instead, they just have rationalized them. We talked about it last week. It's a fake it till you make it type of mindset, and as we'll see later, the actions of some of these characters will finally catch up to them. Now, this business conversation gets cut short when Lori and Harley finally get their revenge for last week. As we watch them release a pig inside the club, chaos is unleashed and Alamo ends up shooting the pig and killing it. Alamo wants to hit Lori where it hurts as he asks Ru for her weaknesses. Ru tells him about her pet bird, Paladin, who's named after Richard Boone's character from the popular TV show from the 50s by the name of Have Gun Will Travel. It's now the next day and we see that after their shower, Ru and Jules are now hanging out again as Ru invites Jules to Nate and Cassie's wedding as her +1. Now, who I thought it was interesting to see the look on Ru's face, this look of concern as she walks through Jules' bathroom. She saw what looked to be a sex toy, but also some coke above her bath. To me, it was just funny to see Ru having this look on her face and considering her line, pun intended, of work dealing of drugs and weapons, yet she's worried about Jules. Now, speaking of Jules, she hasn't seen Nate or Cassie since graduation and isn't sure they want to see her, but Ru pulls out some cash. She looks at Jules and tells her that she's going to be her sugar daddy now as she gives her the money and tells her to wear something sexy to the wedding. Which, speaking of wedding, we all know that HBO knows how to celebrate new marriage, so let's go ahead and break down this insane green wedding. First off, we have Maddie. She shows up in an all-green outfit and it look kind of similar as far as the color goes because it's the same color she wore during Lexi's play when she beat Cassie's ass. The level of I'm here for the drama was off the charts, and later we see just how surprised Nate's parents are to see that Maddie is at their wedding. Now, speaking of Nate, we see him in the bathroom throwing up while ignoring calls from Nas as Cassie's panicking because Nate didn't come home the night before their wedding. Now, I'm assuming that Nate was sick because of whatever shenanigans he did for his bachelor party, but we never do find out exactly what made him sick, besides assuming that he was either nervous about the wedding or not having paid Nas yet, or maybe a combination of both. Now, for the first time this season, we have almost the entire main cast in one scene. As Ru and Jules walk down the aisle, Jules and Cal make eye contact, and we know they have a shared history, and we'll be discussing their conversation a little bit later. Also, I gotta mention a couple things here in this scene. First off, we gotta talk about Jules and this dress that she wore to this wedding. It is very high fashion, but also extremely revealing for a wedding, but shout out to Jules. But also, while watching this scene and seeing Cal's wife, Masha, I am shocked that she stood by his side after everything that we know that he went through and what he did, but also finding out later that she knows about his secret life. So to me, that was wild to see that they are still together. At least that was the vibe I got, that they were still married. And it is the type of ride or die energy that I don't think I'll ever understand, how someone can stay with their husband after everything that Cal has went through. Now, as Cassie prepares to walk down the aisle, her mom gives her some motherly advice about marriage that was basically a horror story.
There I was, never realizing it was the last happy moment I'd shared with your father. God, I looked so beautiful before I started looking like an anorexic witch. And as I marched down the aisle, like we're doing now, it never occurred to me the brutality of the man that I never knew before. It's like, how could I be so naive?
You can get the sense that Cassie is getting the feeling that maybe she is doing the wrong thing, but she's come way too far to stop now. Now, quick side note here, did the show just answer one of the biggest unanswered questions that we've ever had for this series? If we take a look at Nate and his groomsmen, obviously we know that one of them is his brother, but then we have these other two guys, and I'm starting to think to myself, is one of these dudes his brother that was in the family photo from season 1? Or are they simply just like maybe friends of Nate from college, or maybe just his cousins? But let me know in the comments below. Are one of these two guys the mystery third brother that we've been talking about since the very beginning of this show? Now, despite the OnlyFans drama, the $50,000 worth of flowers, and the Maddie of it all, we see that Nate and Cassie officially are married. But while the wedding is happening, a storm is coming. Back at Lori's, Harley is losing it because his son is apparently in love with Faye. But Lori's more focused about the business of it all as she gets a call from Alamo about Ru doing a pickup. Now we watch as they make a plan for Ru to do the drop off, but once she does that, they want to kidnap her immediately after. Now Ru gets the call that she has to do this drop off in the middle of the wedding, and she tells herself that she has a bad feeling about this. She should have listened to her gut, but she's an employee now, so she can't say no. She leaves the wedding, leaving Jules behind with Lexi and Maddie, and seeing Ru walk away from the group felt like a huge piece of foreshadowing in my eyes. Was that a sign that Ru won't be making it out of this season alive? As we know, she's playing this game with people much more dangerous than she thinks, and it could lead her down a path of no return. Now at the reception, we get the most random return of a character that's been around since season 1, and that is BB, who is now pregnant. Now once BB returned, I immediately thought, oh, we are about to get a cameo fest. We're about to see McKay come back, maybe even Ethan might pop up, but I'm kind of being funny about those two. I did not anticipate them coming, but I did secretly think, and I was hoping that maybe, and I know Barbie Ferreira has spoken publicly about her decision about leaving the show, but deep down, I was still kind of hoping that she might pop up for a cameo. It's now time for the wedding speeches, and Kyle's up first as Nate has his brother nearby just in case Kyle says something out of line, but luckily he kept it clean by sharing his love for his son Nate. Now at the bar, we watch as Jules goes over to speak to Kyle about their past. Now this was a conversation I think we were all waiting for as she brings up the tape that Kyle made of them together and how she thought that when he got arrested, she would be called by the police. But Kyle reveals that he was actually taken in for another video entirely and got off because the guy lied about his age. We get more of an understanding about why Kyle's not currently in prison because of a plea deal that he made, and even after all that, Kyle chose to keep in touch with Nate despite him being the one that called the police on him. This whole discussion to me really kind of drives home the core themes of the episode about the blurred lines these characters walk between about what's legal and what's illegal. Now, Jules mentions Kyle's taste in the youth, but as he spins it, he calls it legal, right? Because they're above age or they're right at the age limit. And again, this is just another example of a character rationalizing things to suit their narrative and their actions, as we see Jules shares that sometimes she prefers her romantic partners to be older than her, largely because of their perspective in life. It's not an endorsement, but it adds another layer of their own complex identity and desires, showing how these characters, in their own ways, are searching for connection and sometimes is in problematic places. Now, by the end of this conversation, we get a sense that Jules has this moment of closure with Kyle as they say their goodbyes. Now, back to the speeches, and it's now Nate's mom turn as she talks about what it's like to be a mom of boys and how they sometimes bring home the wrong girl. As she says this, her eyes dart straight to Maddie as she talks about how happy she is for Nate that he found Cassie. I'm not gonna lie, I felt bad for Maddie in this situation, and we'll talk about her here in a second, but I couldn't help but to think of one of my favorite scenes, and I can understand where the wife is coming from, because I think about this scene from season 1 of Euphoria. Now, going back to Maddie, we see her looking at Cassie, and Cassie looks back at her, and you get the impression that maybe Maddie wishes that she was marrying her high school sweetheart instead, but little does she know, breaking things off with Nate all those years ago in high school was actually a blessing in disguise, because as we're going to be talking about later, being with Nate is a literal nightmare, so she 1000% dodged a huge bullet. Now, speaking of nightmares and terrible timing, we see Nas throws a curveball that absolutely broke the wedding's reception's carefully constructed facade. He brings up how Nate owes him and others money as he leaves Nate with a threat.
No. I'm gonna become his worst fucking nightmare.
Now, Cassie's neighbor Heather goes straight to her husband and tells him what just happened and that they gave Nate a ton of money. At first, I'm thinking to myself, damn, this girl is nosy as hell, but then I thought about it more. She's clearly concerned that, number one, they won't be getting their money back anytime soon from Nate, but number two, and probably more importantly, she's probably thinking that Niles will come after them next if Nate isn't able to pay off his debts. Now, this next part here is probably my favorite acting moment of this episode. As Lexi checks in on her sister Cassie, who's got the most horrific look on her face, straight out of a horror movie, as she tries to keep it all together and not cry her eyes out.
Of course. It's my wedding day.
Now look, I know people have their reasons for hating Sydney Sweeney, and honestly, she doesn't always make it easy to ignore the things she said or done in the past off camera. But I do think that some of her off-camera stuff overshadows the fact that, in my humble opinion, she's actually a really decent actress when you're giving her good material. That scene of her holding back her tears and holding it all inside, desperately trying to keep up appearances, was a brilliant moment as far as acting is concerned for her, for me. Like, I thought that was like such a well-constructed scene, and you can just tell the doubts about marrying Nate are just like screaming out of her, and she's realizing it was a huge mistake because she really doesn't know who she married. Now, at their wedding dance, pretending like everything's okay, Nate says to Cassie that they might have to downsize a little as she's again is freaking out. But again, they're now both keeping the fake smiles plastered on their faces as we see Maddie has seen enough and she ultimately leaves the wedding. Again, watching Cassie try not to break and to show how scared she is and Nate keeping his face on at the same time was hilarious during this whole sequence to me. Now, meanwhile, Nate makes up this elaborate story to his neighbor Fred about how some rare flower is causing the development project to pause, and Fred is actually taking the bait. But Heather, on the other hand, not as nearly as gullible as her husband, confronts Cassie directly. She says it all makes sense and she's referring to the OnlyFans because Nate's broke. This was another funny scene because it was cut perfectly with Fred being convinced about Nate's lie, but we also learned from Heather that they invested their kids' college funds, which is an idiot idea. I don't feel bad for them because who in the world does that? But I thought it was just so funny, and this is why I don't feel bad for Cassie overall, because she looks at this woman, at her quote-unquote friend Heather, learning that she just gave money that can't help their kids to Nate, and Cassie's looking at her like she could care less.
And what does that have to do with me?
But now outside, we get another reunion, and it's between Nate and Jules. Now, we all remember just how messed up their story was back in season 1. Now, rumor has it that we were supposed to have a much larger storyline between these two characters, like Jules was supposed to be the Cassie in season 2, but apparently there was some behind-the-scenes drama between Hunter Schafer and Jacob Elorge that prevented that from happening. Now, I do wish the scene was longer between the two characters considering their past, but something tells me this won't be their last scene that they'll be sharing together this season because, again, there's just too much history between the two characters. Now back inside, the drama continues to escalate as Cassie finally snaps at Nate. She lays into him, saying that he's not a real man because he can't provide and he lied about who he is and about conning all their neighbors. As Nate tries to calm down his wife, Cassie, in a moment of pure unleashed rage, pops the champagne cork right at his head. Now, I know a lot of people feel like these characters aren't themselves from season 1 and 2, and I've just always said, well, I don't anticipate them being the exact same because they were in high school, but now they're adults, so I would hope that they would change as characters. But with that being said, I think we can all agree that in this scene, we got the return of crazy Cassie. I think about that scene in the bathroom in season 2 when she told Nate how crazy she was.
You don't understand, Nate, is I am crazier.
We saw those crazy eyes in this scene with the champagne cork. But also, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the lying and the manipulative Nate is also back as well. So I do think the first 2 episodes, again, it was all a facade. It was all an act, but these characters and their real personalities are starting to come back. Now, in the back of the limousine, we see Nate apologizing for lying and immediately starts promising Cassie that he's going to make everything better again and how much he loves her as they kiss and make up. And just like that, the cycle of the liar and manipulator is back in full force. Meanwhile, we see Maddie making her way back home alone, and I can almost guarantee that she's got plans cooking, probably focusing all of her energy on breaking up Nate and Cassie. Now, while all of this was happening, back with Ru on her way to Lori's, she gets a call from prison, and it's Fez. Now, the creator of the show, Sam Levinson, has said that the reason that they want to keep Fez alive is because he wasn't able to make it in real life, so they want to honor him by keeping his character alive in the show. But I also feel like them keeping Fez alive also supports the story narratively. I feel like this scene in particular was another level of foreshadowing that Ru is headed for the same fate, that being prison, or maybe even worse, and that being death. Now, Ru and Bishop arrive to Lori's house, and you can feel the tension in the air as they walk towards the door, and they're greeted by Wayne holding a shotgun to their head. Now, Bishop gives Wayne his gun as they walk in, and Bishop shares Alamo's message that if they want to continue business together, they'll have to do quality control, and everything moving forward would have to be tested first. Now, as they're testing a drug, and Lori's trying to convince Ru to come back into the fold, we see Bishop puts a drug in Lori's bird's water. Now, Bishop tosses them the money like a bullet out of a gun, like a scene straight out of Have Gun Will Travel, as he claims to be a cowboy, and him and Ru ultimately leave. Again, speaking about foreshadowing, this scene to me kind of foreshadowed that we can probably anticipate some level of a shootout between Lori's crew and Alamo's crew at some point this season. Now, we end back at Cassie and Nate's house, and they find Nas in the living room, and he brought some muscle with him as he punches Nate and tosses Cassie on the floor as she hits her face and she starts to bleed. Cassie's screaming because, again, she's bleeding from her face, and in the background, we see Nate is getting his ass beat, very similar to what happened to him in the season 2 premiere when Fez hit him over the head with that bottle and started beating his ass as well. Nate is being dragged around like a rag doll as he's brought into the living room all bloodied up, and we see his shoe be taken off as Nas cuts off his pinky toe. As they leave with Nate screaming in pain as Cassie looks at him in complete shock. So yeah, how exactly will Nate lie his way out of this situation? It wouldn't surprise me if we see him wanting to get Cassie back on OnlyFans to make some money as soon as possible. Now, we've seen some pretty shocking shit in this show. Like, we've seen people being assaulted. We've seen, obviously, Nate beating up that guy in season 1. I think about, obviously, when Ashtray was shot, a kid's death is pretty shocking. But as far as, like, I didn't anticipate for Nate to lose his pinky toe 3 episodes into the season. Like, that was a pretty well-crafted scene. Like, I felt the fear and the tension in that scene. Like, that was a well-put-together scene. But again, I don't know what Nate does from here because we see that Nas is not playing around. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, we see that Jules notices that Ellis is back home, and we see that she flips the switch. She fixes her makeup, she adjusts her posture, and she walks into character. That right there, again, is the thesis of this episode. Everyone is performing. Jules is playing the rich person who's figured out the life hack and using her body to do so to get money. Nate is playing the fake businessman, and Ru is playing Grand Theft Auto. They're all just terrified of being seen for who they actually are underneath the layers of the trauma. And again, this is all just one big performance running away from their fears. Now, as we end with our final scenes, we have Ru in the car listening to the Bible, looking for some type of structure in her very unholy life right now, as the red and blue lights go off behind her. The DEA moves in on her as the law is finally catching up to the mess that she's made. As I said last week, I thought it was going to be the FBI, but as we find out, it was the DEA that was telling her in last week's episode, and now it seems her performance is coming to an end. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if we will see Ru becoming an informant to take down both Lori and Alamo's operations from within. Remember that rat crawling underneath the table in episode 1? Again, I had theorized that maybe Ru will become a rat and will end up snitching on Lori. It looks like that might come true. Now, speaking of Lori, back at her place, we see her bird dies after consuming that poison given to it by Bishop, and it just adds more fuel to the war between Lori and Alamo. Now, you all might agree or disagree with me on this take. I might be on an island all by myself, but this is coming from someone that enjoyed episode 1. But I thought episode 2 was better than episode 1, and I think episode 3 is the best of the 3. And I will go a step even further and say that episode 3 felt most like old school Euphoria. Getting the main cast together was so fun to see on screen. The wedding was definitely the highlight of this episode, and it still maintained the character work, and it weaved in the themes in such an interesting and fascinating way for me in this episode. And again, I think that episode 3 is the best of the 3. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.